The young and the restless spoilers shock. In the dim light of a quiet hospital room, Amy lay in a bed that had become both her sanctuary and her prison. Every breath was a battle, every heartbeat a reminder of the excruciating pain she had endured for so long. Her suffering was not without purpose, it was driven by a singular, desperate desire to win the acceptance of Damien. For years, Amy had believed that if only Damien could see past the scars of her past, he would recognize the love that bound them. But no matter how fiercely she fought against the odds, Damien remained distant and unyielding, his heart locked behind layers of cold indifference. Meanwhile, Nate, whose presence in Amy's life was a secret that was only about to shatter the fragile equilibrium of their world, began to question everything he thought he knew. His suspicions were not limited to the nature of Damien's behavior but extended to the very core of his family's tangled history. Nate wondered, with growing uncertainty and bitterness, whether Damien was truly the son Amy had longed for. Why was Damien so cruel, so dismissive of the love and pain that had defined Amy's life? What had driven him to abandon the warmth of family for a life marred by bitterness and betrayal? As the days wore on, Amy's yearning for reconciliation with the son she so desperately missed grew ever more urgent. Yet, fate had dealt her a cruel twist. The child she believed was her lost son was not the one she thought. In a web of deception and misidentification that spanned decades, it turned out that Nate, the gentle, introspective young man who had silently suffered his own burdens, was in fact Amy's biological son. This revelation was as shocking as it was bittersweet. The truth had always been there, hidden beneath layers of familial lies and painful sacrifices, waiting for the moment when it could finally emerge into the light. Amy's past was marred by regret and heartache. In the desperate throes of her youth, when the world seemed an endless battlefield of betrayals and shattered dreams, she had been forced to make a decision that would haunt her forever. Overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control, Amy had entrusted her newborn son to the Winters family, a decision made in a haze of desperation and hope for a better future for her child. With a heavy heart, she had walked away, believing that this separation might one day allow her to escape the relentless torment that had defined her life. Yet she had never known the full impact of that decision, never realized that it would create a chasm so wide that it threatened to swallow her whole. The turning point came with the arrival of Elena's DNA results, a beacon of hope in the murky twilight of their intertwined lives. The genetic evidence painted a picture that was both startling and clear. Nate was indeed Amy's son. This revelation, unexpected and transformative, sent ripples through the fragile fabric of their family. Nate, upon learning the truth about his origins, found himself standing at a crossroads between bitterness and forgiveness. The revelation was not just a mere fact, it was a key that unlocked the door to a past long hidden and a future that now held the promise of redemption. For Nate, the discovery of his true lineage was a moment of painful clarity. All the whispers, the rumors, and the subtle hints of a mysterious past converged into a single, undeniable truth. His mother, the woman who had sacrificed so much, had never truly abandoned him. The realization stirred a torrent of emotions within him: anger at the years of separation, sorrow for the lost time, and an overwhelming compassion that urged him to forgive. He understood that Amy's decision to leave him with the Winters family was not born of malice but of a profound desperation to protect him from a world that had already been too cruel. Nate resolved that, regardless of the scars left by their separation, he would find it in his heart to forgive her. Amidst these revelations, the enigma of Damien deepened. It became increasingly apparent that Damien was not the son Amy had so fervently hoped to reclaim. Instead, he was an imposter, a shadow of the identity that had been falsely constructed to mask the truth. Was he merely a figure mistaken? Loomed large over every conversation, every silent tear, and every fervent promise. In the final days of her life, Amy faced the inevitable with a mix of resignation and defiant hope. Her suffering had not been in vain, it had paved the way for a long-awaited truth and a bittersweet reunion with the son she never truly knew was hers. As Nate stood by her side, his eyes reflecting a blend of forgiveness and determination, he made a solemn vow. No matter how fragile her life had become, he would be her shield, her advocate, and the living proof that even the deepest wounds could heal when nurtured with love and understanding. The intricate tapestry of their lives, woven with threads of loss, betrayal, and ultimately redemption, stood as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. In a world where identities could be mistaken and truths hidden beneath layers of deceit, Amy and Nate's story emerged as a beacon of hope. It was a story of a mother who had once been forced to make the hardest decision of her life, a son who discovered his true identity amidst the ruins of the past, and the realization that forgiveness could transform even the most tragic of histories. As Amy's final moments approached, a serene calm settled over the room. The air, heavy with the weight of years of unspoken grief and tentative hope, seemed to pause in reverence for the reunion that had finally come full circle. Nate held his mother's hand tightly, a silent promise that she would not be left to face the darkness alone. And in that quiet, poignant moment, the truth, painful, undeniable, and ultimately redemptive, was clear. Love, in all its forms, had the power to overcome even the most harrowing of fates. Thus, as the night drew its velvet curtain over the city, the story of Amy, Nate, and the imposter Damien was etched into the annals of a history filled with both despair and the promise of renewal. And while Amy's body weakened, the bond between mother and son grew stronger, a living testament to the fact that the ties of blood and forgiveness are among the most enduring forces in the human heart. As the sun dipped below the city skyline, a hush settled over the hospital corridor where Nate paced restlessly. The faint hum of fluorescent lights did nothing to calm his nerves. He'd spent his entire career calmly reassuring others in crisis, yet now he found himself beset by anxiety. The reason lay behind a single closed door: Amy, his newly discovered biological mother, suffering from a form of cancer that required a liver transplant to prolong her life. Nate had devoted his life to medicine, building a reputation as a brilliant doctor who would stop at nothing to save his patients. But this time, the patient was more than a name on a chart. It was his own mother, a woman whose identity had only recently come to light. The revelation that Amy was, in fact, his birth mother had shattered the careful composure he prided himself on. Now, her life hung in the balance, and with it, the delicate new bond they'd only just begun to forge. A living donor transplant was Amy's best hope, a chance for her to defeat the cancer that ravaged her body. But such a procedure required a compatible donor, someone who not only matched her blood type but also met the medical criteria for donation. Nate's immediate thought was, if I'm her son, perhaps I can save her. With characteristic determination, he began the process of testing for donor compatibility. Yet an uneasy skepticism gnawed at the back of his mind. He knew better than most that being a biological child didn't automatically guarantee a suitable match. There were more variables at play than simple parentage. Word of the possible transplant and Nate's intentions spread quickly, and soon Devon arrived at the hospital, concern etched into every line of his face. He and Nate had shared a bond forged through trials and triumphs, yet the news that Amy was Nate's biological mother had left him reeling. He remembered the confusion and emotional fallout from the prior DNA test, how the results had upended everything Nate thought he knew about his past. Now, a second test was on the horizon, this time to determine whether Nate could donate part of his liver to save Amy's life. Devon caught Nate's eye as soon as he rounded the corner of the bustling hospital hallway. "Are you sure about this?" he asked gently, a mixture of worry and support in his tone. Nate paused for a moment, exhaling a sigh that carried the weight of his fears. "I'm not sure of anything right now," he admitted. "All I know is I want to help her if I can. But we need additional tests to confirm I'm a match. Until then, everything's up in the air." They turned to glance through the small window in Amy's door, where she lay hooked up to monitors that beeped out a steady, rhythmic reminder of her fragile state. Devon studied Nate's expression, a meld of concern, love, and guilt. It had only been days since the shocking news of Amy's true identity had come to light. Nate had barely begun to process the fact that he had a mother he'd never truly known, and now she was teetering on the brink of life and death. For Amy's part, the thought of her newly reunited son offering up part of his own liver filled her with conflicting emotions. She was touched by his willingness to save her, yet apprehensive about the procedure's risks. Tears had welled up in her eyes the night before when she pleaded for Nate to focus on his own well-being. If anything should go wrong, she couldn't bear the guilt. But Nate's resolve was unshakable. He was a doctor, he knew the dangers. If there was any chance he could keep her alive, he had to try. In a private consultation room, Elena was busy arranging for the second DNA test. She had been instrumental in uncovering the initial truth of Nate's parentage, and now she was just as committed to ensuring the path forward was scientifically sound. She double-checked the forms, carefully lining them up on the smooth wooden table. Each piece of paperwork represented a step closer to confirmation, or disappointment. If the second round of genetic screening goes through, Elena explained, we'll know if Nate is a match for Amy's transplant. But we can't rush this. It has to be precise. Outside in the corridor, Devon stepped closer to Nate, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. He spoke quietly, mindful of the tension that weighed on them like a physical presence. We'll get through this, he said, his voice steady. One way or another, we'll find a way to help Amy. You don't have to carry this alone. Nate managed a small, grateful smile. He knew that Devon's support was genuine. Despite the confusion of recent events, and the emotional upheaval unleashed by the revelations about Amy, Devon remained a steadfast friend. But the question that loomed over them all was this: what if Nate wasn't a suitable donor? Could they find someone else who could save Amy in time? The very thought of failing her now, after finally learning the truth, clawed at Nate's insides like a storm of panic. Time ticked by in anxious increments as blood samples were drawn, labels affixed, and the second DNA test prepared for analysis. In the end, all anyone could do was wait. Wait for the lab results that would determine if a mother could be saved by the child she had once unknowingly left behind. Wait to see if the tenuous threads of connection forming between Nate and Amy could weave themselves into something lasting and filled with hope. For now, a cautious optimism lingered in the air around them. Nate, Devon, and Elena braced for the coming days, prepared to face either heartbreak or a miracle. And in the silence of her hospital room, Amy prayed that fate would grant her just a little more time, a chance to live free of the cancer stealing her breath and to truly know the son she had only just found again. Nate stood in the sterile hallway, a bundle of lab reports clutched under one arm. The rhythmic beeping of monitors and the faint smell of antiseptic filled the air, a familiar backdrop to his long days as a physician. Normally, such a scene would calm him. Hospitals were his domain, a place where he knew exactly how to apply his expertise. But this time, worry pressed down on his shoulders, dragging his usually upright posture into something less confident. On the other side of the thick wooden door lay Amy, the woman he had only recently discovered was his biological mother. Her tears, her joy, and her fragility had all become inextricably tied to him in just a matter of days. From the moment he first laid eyes on Amy, Nate sensed that something was terribly wrong. Her skin had a slight yellowish tinge, indicative of potential liver complications. He noticed the faint trembling in her hands, an occasional shortness of breath, and the aura of exhaustion that enveloped her every movement. With years of medical training under his belt, he immediately recognized these signs as evidence of underlying disease. Indeed, the initial tests and subsequent scans only confirmed his suspicions. Amy was battling a severe condition, potentially cancer-related, and she needed urgent intervention. Liver disease, likely advanced, had taken hold of her, and a transplant or significant medical intervention would be her only lifeline. Yet, as pressing as Amy's health crisis was, there were other complications swirling around them. In the hospital's staff lounge, Devon sat with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the stainless steel coffee machine that hissed and sputtered in the corner. A sense of unease had settled in his chest ever since he learned of the DNA results linking Nate and Amy as mother and son. He wanted to be supportive of truly, he did, but a small voice inside warned him that hope could be dangerous if built on shaky ground. Devon remembered the moment Elena had given them the results of the first DNA test. The shock on Nate's face was unmistakable, a mixture of confusion and profound revelation. Amy had sobbed, collapsing into Nate's arms with a cry of joy. Nate, stricken by equal parts surprise and relief, held her close. For the first time in his life, he felt certain of his origins. There was no more guesswork, no more unanswered questions about who his birth mother might be. The bond they formed in that instant was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Despite the beauty of that moment, Devon's instincts sounded an alarm. He knew from experience that the world could be cruel and manipulative. He had seen family secrets tear people apart before, and he refused to let the same fate befall Nate. So, while it pained him to sow even the tiniest seeds of doubt, he quietly approached Elena, suggesting they run another set of DNA tests, just to be certain there had been no mix-up. The stakes, after all, were astronomical. If Amy truly was Nate's mother, he might soon be called upon to donate a portion of his liver to save her life. Devon couldn't stand the possibility of Nate being deceived into risking his own health for someone who wasn't even who she claimed to be. Elena's reaction was immediate and fiery. She had spent hours meticulously working on that DNA test, double-checking each detail. Her scientific integrity was at stake, and Devon's suggestion that her work might be flawed felt like an accusation. Leaning forward at the small round table where they sat, she snapped, "Do you not trust me as a doctor or a researcher? I took every precaution, Devon, and there's no reason to think the test is inaccurate." He lifted his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not trying to insult you," Devon insisted, choosing his words carefully. "But we've all seen how easy it is to fall for misinformation, especially when we're desperate for answers. You know how much this means to Nate, how much this means to Amy." His voice trailed off, but the intensity of his concern remained evident in the set of his jaw and the tightness around his eyes. Elena sighed, rubbing a hand across her forehead. She was tired of tension, tired of second-guessing her own competence, and definitely tired of seeing everyone she cared about burdened by so many secrets. "I get it," she finally relented in a softer tone. "I'll see what I can do about verifying the results, but understand, Devon, I wouldn't have given Nate any information unless I was absolutely certain. And I hate that you don't believe me." While Devon and Elena debated in hushed voices, Nate focused on Amy's care. He had arranged consultations with a top oncologist who specialized in liver-related cancers, and the consensus was unanimous: if Amy stood any chance of surviving, she needed a transplant. Even chemotherapy alone might not be enough, her condition seemed too advanced. A donor match was the paramount concern, and while some of Amy's distant relatives had been mentioned, none were as close genetically as a son would be. That, of course, left Nate as the prime candidate. Nate, still reeling from the shock of discovering his true parentage, wrestled with the moral and ethical dimensions of such a decision. Could he, in good conscience, donate a portion of his liver? Yes, he was in excellent health, and medically it was often possible for a live donor to recover fully. But there were still risks involved, serious risks. As a doctor, he understood them better than most. The procedure wasn't without pain, complications, or even the remote possibility of death. Was he prepared to make that sacrifice for a woman who, just a short while ago, had been a stranger? Yet every time he gazed upon Amy's face, every time he saw the frailty of her frame and the tears that welled in her eyes, he found his resolve tightening. Beneath the weight of everything unsaid, there was a maternal warmth in her expressions, an unspoken love that had clearly waited years for an outlet. When she had first learned the truth, when Elena had handed her the final results of that pivotal DNA test, Amy had broken down, hugging Nate with such fervor that he thought his chest would burst.